Hello, everyone. How are you doing? And welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where we have the discussions that inform, entertain, and empower educators to be the change. I am your host, Dr. Will, and I am here today with a very special guest, Tucker. How are you doing, Catlin?
I'm doing very well.
Awesome, awesome. And we will be discussing her book, Blended Learning in Action. Make sure, because I didn't see anything flip. Okay, let's see if I can get this out of here. Okay, so if we can see this, I now do ebooks, but can y'all see this? Blended Learning in Action. That's the book. Go pick it up. Go pick it up. It's going to be, I'll have a link on the blog post of this where you can actually go pick it up and purchase it. It is an awesome book. Catlin, you know that you are amazing and a well sought out expert in blended learning. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show was I did a needs assessment to my teachers last month. Mm-hmm. And it came back. One of the things teachers were talking about is how do they put it all together? Because that's what it was like. How do we put this all together? You know, you talk to us about this, but the whole putting it together piece was very difficult for them. And I watched one of your videos. So I may bring it up if you don't, because it was just so awesome the way you sort of said it. So let me get this over here. As more schools and districts make the move to implement blended learning, how should administrators, instructional technologists prepare teachers for blended instruction? How should teachers themselves prepare for the mental shift in instruction?
Yeah, it's a really big shift, particularly for teachers who have been teaching for a while. They have a method that they've used that for some of them, they feel like they work. And then we're asking them to make these just enormous changes in the way they not only design lessons, but also facilitate and kind of execute those lessons. So thinking about it from leadership administration, it becomes really important, in my opinion, to start thinking about how we are not just investing in like the actual infrastructure, the Wi-Fi and those pieces in a school, but really the professional learning infrastructure. How are we supporting teachers from kind of that moment where we spark an idea and say, hey, this is what we want to do, to the actual implementation? Because the reality is when most teachers are in those trainings and they're hearing about a blended learning model, or they're hearing about a particular technology tool that administration or the school wants to kind of give a go, a lot of them get excited, they're intrigued, some are not. They're a little slower to get like pumped about it. They might be more nervous than excited. But the reality is that even the ones who are excited, when it comes time to implement, that's when a lot of teachers kind of stumble. And if implementation is rough, then they tend to kind of abandon new strategies and models. So for me, I think from the leadership perspective, like, how are we introducing the models? Are we making it concrete for teachers? And then how are we supporting them as they move to lesson design and then implementation, and then really that reflective, like, how did it go? What worked? What didn't work? What do I improve for next time? So that it can't just be bringing in an expert for a day or two to kind of like introduce concepts. It really needs to be a long-term strategy and really think about that professional learning infrastructure. From a teacher perspective, that's harder. Teachers, I've learned a lot by working with teachers all over the country. And there are teachers who they see the need, they see the value in this shift. I mean, they see technology all over their lives outside of school. They have children of their own who are growing up with technology, and they maybe aren't the harder sell. And then you have teachers who are super uncomfortable with technology. They don't want to use it. They don't see the point. They feel like what they're doing works for them. And how you start really shifting that mentality, I think, is rooted in like the culture of your school and kind of what you've decided are your priorities and how you're going to get there. And whenever you start talking about school culture, it's a little bit more abstract, and like, how do you create a school culture that really inspires teachers to take risks and keep learning and experiment and be okay with failure? I mean, those are things that teachers have to feel safe to be able to do and to really get excited about making a shift like this.
So let's talk about going digital.
Yeah.
Look like in comparison to a traditional curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the challenges in digitizing the curriculum?
I don't know if I see challenge, I work part-time as a blended learning coach in the district north of me. And part of my concern, so maybe this is a challenge, is that oftentimes when schools are shifting to blended learning, they kind of buy all of this pre-canned content, these big adaptive software programs, and then they like require teachers to use them for X amount of time. And part of my concern about that digital curriculum is that I don't know that sometimes it leaves room for teachers to pull together pieces from online that they're excited to incorporate into the learning. So for me, I pull articles, I pull videos, I pull different kinds of media to make students' experience with concepts and topics richer. And sometimes I worry if an administrative team decides, we're gonna purchase this like big chunk of curriculum and we're gonna have teachers use this in the online stations, that it actually can be kind of counterproductive to the teacher creativity. So on one hand, I'm so excited about all of our access to resources and technology tools and there's some phenomenal digital curriculum, don't get me wrong, but just sometimes I feel like teachers feel like, what I do and my creativity and my design is just being replaced by this big behemoth of curriculum that I have to kind of get through.
Yeah, I know a lot of teachers say that because, as in going to one-to-one, we've done the same thing that all school districts do, as you mentioned earlier, of, whether it's for different programs, you purchase those. And with some programs, they will tell you to see the results, you must use this with fidelity this many times a week at this amount of time. So I hear what you're saying. Now, in your book, you write about the building blocks of a digital classroom. Now, there are a lot of tools at various price points and functions and have different functionalities. How should a teacher go about finding the right tool?
That's a great question. I think sometimes teachers are kind of excluded from that exploration, which is, like a school district will have, or will find a company they're interested in, they'll have teachers pilot it. But what I think is kind of maybe the better road is to really have teachers be going out and kind of trying to determine for themselves what aspects of our curriculum would be improved or enhanced by using technology or digital tools. And then they should be really the ones exploring what's out there and what makes sense for them. And this becomes tricky because every teacher might have a different perspective and then, compromise. And I've always thought it was kind of a shame that a school district is sometimes forced to just buy one thing for everybody. That's why I personally tend to gravitate towards free tools, things that I can pick up and use because my school district doesn't pay for anything. So I'm really kind of forced to make it work. I have a lot of make it work moments. But I use like Schoology's free version for online discussions. And I use, the free version of vocabulary.com for that adaptive vocabulary practice. And I use a free version of No Red Ink. And what I love about my ability I have this autonomy to just choose what works for me, what's going to work for my kids. And nobody's telling me what I have to do. And so if my school was going to invest a lot of money into a digital curriculum or kind of a set of technology tools for my tool belt or my toolbox, I would definitely want to be a big voice in that conversation. So the more we engage teachers in the exploration of what's out there and conversations about how it would enhance learning in their classrooms, I think the more you're going to get teachers who are excited to use technology.
So in chapters 9 through 12, you cover several blended learning models.
Mm-hmm.
Please provide an overview of the station rotation and whole group models, and what is the process like for selecting which model works best for students?
Yeah. So what's interesting, we talk about, or I wrote about in that whole group explanation, is we really see that as kind of a more modern spin on the lab rotation. So, you know, the lab rotation is this idea that students are rotating through like an actual lab environment and maybe a classroom space. And so for us, we were talking about, you know, Jason and Tiffany and I were talking about how ubiquitous like mobile carts of tech are becoming, and they have so many schools that are moving like one-to-one or bring your own device. So, you know, it's not necessary for you to kind of plan a schedule in which kids rotate through a lab. So the idea with whole group is that you're literally, as the teacher, kind of rotating the entire class as a whole through offline and online activities within one classroom setting. And the benefit of that being is that if, as students go online, then you can incorporate those kind of adaptive pieces where they're getting that personalized practice. You can have them kind of collaborating in the online space. There's lots of things that you can do with kids in those moments, but it frees you as the teacher up to then pull individual students back to a desk, or, you know, make your way around the room and sit next to kids and really troubleshoot with kids who need additional support. They need some extra scaffolds or whatever's going on for them. And so that's kind of a neat structure. And I think for secondary teachers who they're used to having kind of a linear agenda, they move through each item on that agenda. It's an easier shift for them to say, okay, well, we're going to do this together offline, and then you're going to do this together online, then we're going to come back together offline. Whereas it's maybe not as natural of a shift for elementary, because elementary teachers actually use the learning station model really naturally. They tend to break kids up into groups, kids rotate through different stations, and so for them, the station rotation might be the next logical step in terms of shifting from kind of an offline to a blended classroom. And the station rotation does exactly what its name suggests, right? There's a series of stations, kids rotate through them, and the only thing that makes it really a blended learning model is that at least one of those stations has to be an online station. And when I work with teachers and train teachers, I suggest kind of the basic like teacher-led station, getting that face-to-face time with small groups. So again, you can kind of tailor your direct instruction, your modeling, your scaffolds and supports to the kids who are sitting in front of you. You have the online station or stations, and then the offline stations. And I really recommend that teachers consider how like the kids, or like what kids are being asked to do in each of those stations. So if you can have it be online, offline, online, offline. So kids aren't online at every station. They're not staring at a screen for huge chunks of time, because I do think kids get a little fatigued staring at a screen for multiple stations in a row. So I really love that model. And there are times in station rotation where I might design all the stations where kids are moving through them and I'm not leading one, and then I can still pull those individual students. But I typically choose to use station rotation when I want to work with small groups. And then I use whole group when I want to pull individual kids. And I don't have I'm not at a school that's one-to-one. And so if I don't have a Chromebook cart where everybody can get online, then I have to use the station rotation model. So sometimes it's out of necessity, and sometimes it's because the model is the best model for whatever the objective of the lesson is.
Mm-hmm. So now, again, huge fan, and I've been on YouTube, just watch videos that you've done and web, and the whole breakdown of blended learning for, I believe it was Macmillan. And by the way, I took all those videos, and in the blended learning module that I created for our teachers, I actually put those videos.
Oh, good.
As examples. But you know, some of the videos you've done, you cover how there are videos that you yourself record for students to go through. And some of the things that I hear from teachers when we're trying to, you know, transition them into this blended learning piece is the time it takes to create all of this digital stuff, to find all of this digital stuff. uh, and how all of this sort of, how do I put this together and create a workflow that works best for me because they're used to teaching in a certain way.
Yeah.
So in hearing that, please walk me through designing a blended lesson. What goes into creating the workflow for, let's say, station rotation?
Okay.
Which, one of my schools that I work with is an elementary school. And how do you choose what should go online versus what should be taught face to face?
So before I get into how you design these stations, I want to address something, because I think what you're hearing from teachers about, like, holy cow, this is a ton of work. They're right. It's whenever I train teachers, particularly on station rotation, I am the first to say, I don't do this every day. And part of the reason, I do it multiple times a week, but I don't do it every day because there is so much front loading that happens in a station rotation that, to do it every day, I don't know if that's realistic for me personally. And so one of the things that I have done this year that has been a game changer, and I think you actually retweeted a blog I wrote about this, but I don't take grading home anymore. I'm all done. I'm an English teacher who teaches 9th and 10th grade, and I haven't taken a stack of digital papers home with me since January. And what I've realized is, as I move assessment and feedback into the classroom, using blended learning models. So I couldn't do this if I wasn't using station rotation, if I wasn't using whole group rotation, if I wasn't doing in-class flips where they were watching videos and then doing other stuff. But what's interesting about that is I'm spending more of my time in the classroom really coaching and providing that real-time feedback as kids work. And I'm not taking that home with me. And that, if teachers are balancing, the grading and the paperwork and the planning, it's not sustainable. So I think the more they can push the feedback and the grading or assessment back into the classroom, then they free up their prep period, their time outside of school to do the kind of stuff that you're talking about, like finding resources, designing cool lesson concepts and activities. And I think 90% of the teachers, that's a part of their job they really like. They love that creative aspect of teaching. And unfortunately, most of the time we don't have the time to dedicate to it because we're trying to get through this proverbial stack of papers that never disappears. So I just want to say that for teachers who feel like you're taking it all home, we need to be more strategic about what we're spending our time doing in the classroom when we're actually with these people that we're teaching. Now, in terms of getting ready for a lesson, for me, I'm a really visual person. So my lesson planning starts usually at the end of one day before I leave home. I will go up to my whiteboard, and if I know I'm doing a station rotation, I will literally draw boxes for how many stations I'm going to do. So there's 4 stations. I draw 4 boxes on the board, and I'm like, okay, these are the things I need to do. And which one would make the most sense as the teacher-led station? Do I need to explain something? Do I need to reteach something? Do I need to give feedback on something? And then that's my teacher-led station. Okay, what is it that the kids are going to be trying to apply? If they're applying new information, would it make sense for them to work together? If that's the case, okay, that's an offline station. And what collaborative offline activity or discussion or challenge am I going to design for them? Okay, then I have another online station. Is there some online practice or review that they can do? Do I want them to have an experience, or I want them to hone their online annotating and reading skills? Okay, maybe I'll have them read a text online and annotate it. So for me, it's figuring out what is it that I need to cover curriculum wise, and what skills are they practicing, what information they're applying, and where does it fit in this teacher-led offline online scenario. And then I try to make sure that I'm really maximizing the fact that I have these people together so that there are collaborative pieces and individual pieces. They're not doing the same thing at multiple stations. So that's how I do my station rotation. And then once I have a basic design sketched on the board, I usually just take a picture of it. And then when I'm home, I'm typing up the online directions on a Google document to share with them the next day so they know what's happening in each of the stations. So that's my workflow. It works really well for me. And then for whole group, that one's actually much more natural for me because I write out an agenda. We're going to do this and this and this. And then the question for me is, where is technology going to enhance and improve the learning? And where it could enhance and improve the learning or do something, allow kids to do something that they couldn't do without technology, then we use it. And if it doesn't, then we don't use it, because I am not an advocate of using technology just because it's there.
Okay. So I want to throw this out there to you.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I have had, more than one teacher ask me is, are we being replaced by technology? Because it's, particularly at a one-to-one school, we have a bunch of it. And their concern is the teacher's role. How do they fit in? If you have a program, let's say like Odyssey, which has full-on courses in there, so a student can go through there and it's going to be automatically graded except the essays, or Schoology, again, your assessments and all those things can be automatically graded. And you talked about how you've moved stuff online, you're not even taking stuff home, which is a great bonus for you. But for those teachers who feel sort of they're being pushed out, what do you say to them in terms of their place in this modern classroom?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I don't feel that concern for myself at all. I can understand teachers' concern, but I think that has everything to do with how we define our own role. And what I mean by that is, when I first started teaching, I was 22 and I felt like I needed to know everything. If kids asked me questions and I didn't know the answer, I felt like I was a failure as a teacher. Because really at that point in my teaching career, I felt it was my job to be like this fountain of knowledge, right? Just kind of like spewing information all over kids. And the reality is I kind of had to be, because we didn't have computers in the classroom. If they had a question and we couldn't look it up in a dictionary and I couldn't answer it, we just didn't know the answer. And so if I thought that was still my role today, then yes, technology, an online course module, Google, it could all replace me, because you know what? Google is always going to know a whole heck of a lot more than I do, period. But I don't see my role that way anymore. I really do believe that my role and my primary job, well, I feel like I have two jobs, really. I'm like split between two. One is that I'm this architect of learning experiences. And I think that's where teachers need to feel like they really have a role in creating curriculum, in designing the student experience in the classroom, and coming up with really cool project concepts, things that a computer just isn't going to do the same way that we would do it. And then two, I do feel that my job is to be this coach, giving them as much feedback as they're working as humanly possible. And there are definitely, I can have multiple choice and true false stuff in Schoology, and I use their online assessment tool with my students, but there's always short answer questions in there. I always want to hear them explain and use textual evidence and justify their kind of arguments and opinions. And so I can't just automatically grade it. I am reading it. I am giving them feedback. So I think that if teachers perceive their role as, I'm an architect of these learning experiences in this classroom, and I am a coach who gives real-time meaningful feedback, then I don't think they would feel as much like technology could replace them, because I don't feel like I'm replaceable. I feel like my kids have a really unique experience because of what I'm bringing to the table as their teacher.
So now let's get into student ownership. We're on Twitter, so we hear that everywhere.
Yeah.
So what does student ownership mean to you, and how can teachers move towards a more personal learning experience for students?
I think that when we talk about student ownership, it's really about kids driving the learning. It's them deciding that they're going to engage, They're going to create. They are going to like push themselves. And unfortunately, in a lot of classes, even, you know, and we are on Twitter and I hear about really cool stuff teachers are doing all the time, but even creative teachers were like, oh, I did this project and look at my kids all did this. A lot of those teachers are telling kids, this is the exact path you have to walk to get to this outcome. This is the outcome that I want. And these are the sequence of steps, and this is the technology tools you're going to use to get here. And I feel like it's hard for kids to own the learning in that kind of a model, because we own the learning. We're the ones telling them exactly how to get from point A to point B. And so for me, for them to take true ownership, I tell them what I want the outcomes to be, right? These are the skills that we're practicing that you need to show me proficiency and mastery of. And then I want you to forge your own path. And that means deciding what technology tool makes sense for the outcome I'm trying to get to, or the product I'm going to create. And I'll be honest, that takes a shift, or that requires a shift on the part of the student too, because not only are teachers having to adapt to a different role, but we're asking students to be active, engaged members in a student-centered classroom when we ask them to take ownership of their learning. And I'll tell you that taking ownership of your learning and being a member of a student-centered class is so much more challenging for them than to be that passive observer in the classroom who listens to a teacher talk, takes notes, okay, this is what I'm gonna do, and just follow step 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I've outputted whatever you've asked me to do. And so sometimes I have kids push back, like, hey lady, what are you asking me to do in here? Like, can't you just like give me some notes and leave me alone? And so it's just been really interesting because I have kids who are high achievers, and they're the ones who almost struggle the most with owning the learning because they want me to tell them exactly how to do it. They've been conditioned for 9 years for people to tell them exactly how to do it, and I won't. And they get frustrated with me because it's harder and it takes more time and it takes creativity and higher order thinking and all of those things. So it's an interesting progression for teachers as well as the students we work with.
So I want to throw this out there to you because you mentioned this earlier, how you are a blended learning coach.
Mm-hmm.
What I have been trying to do, and I don't know if I've been successful at it or not, but I've tried to, in working with my teachers, to look at their strengths and try to bring the best out of them in the blended learning classroom. So for a teacher that I know, for example, who's great at the lecture part,
mm-hmm.
Then I'm thinking, okay, well, let's use explain everything. You're awesome that way. And the students are getting your instruction. They're hearing your voice. They're seeing instruction laid out the way you do it. And then, you can take that and, pop that in the Schoology for them to look at it and be able to do something else in Pearson or whatever you want them to do. And the work that you're doing, working with teachers and bringing this new philosophy, because your book, you talk about the mental shift and the blended learning roadmap, which will be our next question, and other things that are about, okay, this is how the classroom is changing, but not necessarily teachers are changing or ready for that change. Mm-hmm. How do you work with teachers to sort of get them to take the leap, but also sort of bring out the best of what they're already doing or what they're already good at?
So every teacher is different, and I'm lucky enough that in my coaching position, I get to work one-on-one with them. So I'm able to really spend time with individual teachers. And one of the pieces, I think probably my favorite stage in like the coaching cycle that I use with my teachers is the co-lesson planning. And I think for me, one of the things that is so powerful about that is I've worked with I'm actually working with a teacher right now. She's been teaching for 30 years and she teaches 5th grade, and she's being asked to switch to station rotation and be a blended learning teacher. And I think she like logically see some value in it, but there's also, it's just such a huge shift. And there's aspects of it that I know are hard for her. And I think it's when you co-lesson plan with a teacher where you actually sit down, and I would recommend if you're a coach, do not do this in the teacher's classroom, get outside of the space that has all the reminders of the stuff they have to deal with, and go to like a neutral zone, whether it's like a coffee house or a conference room or whatever. But instead of just talking about, hey, this is what you could do, I am very concrete with them. Okay, this is what you're already doing. Here's what I see you doing really well. I think this could be a neat extension of that. Let's plan a lesson. And so because I'm super visual, usually we'll be in like a little conference space or something on a school site, and I will use a whiteboard. Like I'll sketch, okay, how many stations do you want? Okay, and we'll talk about how many kids you want a station. We'll sketch out the actual boxes. What is it that you're already doing that's working? Let's keep it. And let's look at what the areas where kids don't seem super engaged, or the areas where maybe so one of the issues I see a lot is that like the online station and the offline stations don't change very much. So kids are constantly going online and they're doing practice with a certain program. And so instead of being pumped like, yeah, it's technology station, they're like, oh, here we go, on this online practice, or okay, offline station, it's always like, pages in a workbook. And so for me, it's like, okay, how can we take a nugget of something you're doing, but like rethink it with technology, or rethink it with like collaborative group activities. So, and then it's not just us talking about it. I hold their feet to the fire, and they leave with a complete lesson. They leave with the Google Doc with directions, or they lead with the multimedia slide deck, or they leave with whatever they need to implement. Because what I don't want to happen is that we just talk about what they need to do, and then they go home with this huge to-do list. I feel like when we actually create the lessons together, I'm able to nudge and push and say, oh, what about this? Or this would be cool. And then they leave with something that's more than they would have created on their own, or a little further outside their comfort zone than they would have designed. And I think that's really helpful. And then if I can be there when they're actually implementing, to be like a real-time coaching and kind of like a co-teaching support, then that's even better, because they're less nervous about trying the new pieces that we've designed together.
Awesome. So before we go, I want your call to action for schools that are at the beginning of the blended learning roadmap.
Well, I think my call to action definitely kind of circles back to where we started in this conversation, which is for administrators and leaders. They have to have the real vision of where this is headed and why, and they have to be committed to not just a physical infrastructure, but a professional learning infrastructure. And to know that a lot of times when we start this road, walking this road together, it is really smart to focus on one thing at a time, like one model. Like, don't overwhelm teachers with like everything they could possibly do. Introduce a model and then figure out how you're going to support them towards and through their first implementation.
Awesome. That is something that we had to learn, because we have been doing technology boot camps since the inception. So this new summer will be our fourth one. And the first two, we hit the teachers up with everything.
Fire hose.
Everything. And because, again, we're on Twitter, we know all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, oh, now we pay for Schoology and we pay for Nearpod. So there's a given. We're a Google app school. That's a given. But we started hitting like boom, 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 everything. Yeah. We're like, that's so nice. I love this tool here. And then teachers were like, whoa. I was just very overwhelmed with it. And we were like, okay. So last year, the tools and sort of focus, okay, let's talk about blended learning. Let's talk about SAMR. Let's really sort of dive deeper into how your classroom is going to change. And this year we're scaling back even more, and we're some demo lessons from our veteran teachers for the new teachers that are coming in. So
that's a great idea.
Thank you. So when they come in, right? So they're instead of me saying, okay, here is Quizlet Live or whatever, they will be a student, and a veteran teacher will actually teach a lesson, and they'll go through the lesson as a student, and go through that stuff, works out, and then they'll have the opportunity to ask that teacher, well, how did you get to this point? What was your thought process in this? And because we knew that I want transformation, and I know that transformation has to come from them taking ownership of this, of what we do in blended learning. If I say something, okay, all right.
It's okay, Dr. Will.
I'll do the 20 minutes. But there's no buy-in.
Yeah.
And we need buy-in. We need to change the culture. We need it set up to a point to where my boss always, he challenged us to work yourself out of a job, because he wanted the culture that the teachers took on the ownership. So if someone new came in, they coached them up. They're working together. They're sharing and all those things. So we've learned a lot over these few years. But
I bet.
So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. You have no idea how I'm so giddy inside for having you on here, because you're so awesome, and your books, not only this one but others, it's concrete and it's nice. And when I saw that video of, teachers are used to playing the lessons in vertical, let's make it horizontal. You mentioned that earlier too. So those are the kind of things that I know teachers like and they need, and help them.
There's a lot of books on blended learning, but I do agree with you. So a lot of them are very like big idea stuff, which I think is so inspiring. But I think sometimes what we need as educators is like, tell me how to do it. Give me like really concrete strategies that I can try and then have some success with, and then I can kind of make it my own.
Excellent. Again, people, the book is Blended Learning in Action. On this blog post for you to go and buy it on Amazon. She was like, okay, I'm going to put this on LinkedIn. This is going to be on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. It's going on Twitter as well. I'm going to even put this on Facebook. Everywhere I am, I'm sharing this podcast. And go ahead, pick up the book. I am serious. I can tell you other blended books that I bought, and they were all big picture, all this, but they didn't get to the nitty gritty. So this is nitty gritty. So you're going to really love this book. And as always, people, invest in you, EDU. Peace.